I need you to imagine this. My hand trembling over a pen, the ink like a noose around everything I worked for, while my own daughter smiles at me as if she's the one doing me a favor. That was the moment. Bright fluorescent lights, the banks hum like a distant storm, my granddaughter's name used like a weapon. When I discovered the shape of the woman I had become and the cost of a lifetime of saying yes. If you're watching this on Aunt Clara's tale, stick with me. There are things I only started to understand in the seconds before I refused to sign, and you'll want to hear how a life of giving finally learned to take care of itself. If this story touches you in any way, please like the video and subscribe. We'll need your strength for the rest of this journey. My name is Olivia Anderson, and I am 69 years old. I never thought I would be the kind of person whose life could be picked apart with polite words and practiced smiles. I never thought the love I offered, the sacrifices I made, would be read by others like a map to a buried treasure. For 46 years I lived with Peter. He was my husband, my steady, my quiet laugh in the morning. And together we learned how to keep a house warm on a shoestring. How to save nickel by nickel until there was enough for a small, shining thing to happen. We learned how to say yes to our daughter's needs and no to our own little luxuries. We learned how to survive. When Peter died 3 years ago, something important changed. I thought the change would be quiet and terrible and final. In truth, it was subtle at first. An extra call asking for help with a car repair, a text that read, "Mom, we need you." A familiar voice that suddenly sounded tired and urgent. I thought I was honor-bound to answer. After all, what good is a mother if she won't help when her child calls in trouble? But help, I discovered, has a shape. And sometime around the 3rd loan and the 10th favor that never returned, that shape became a noose. What I'm telling you now is not an accusation meant to burn bridges. It is a memory I need to lay out so you can understand why that bank visit felt like an ambush. I need you to know the small kindnesses I had stacked like bricks, because someone else used my bricks to build a wall around me and then demanded more for the view. Vanessa came into the world in the soft hours of a spring morning. I remember the exact way her hair smelled when I first held her, and that strange, tiny certainty I had then, that I would carry whatever burdens she might need. Little green eyes like the father's, a laugh that could flatten a bad day into nothing. When she was 5, we scraped enough together for a pink bicycle. When she wanted to go to a private summer program at 15, I pawned a keepsake to pay for it. When she wanted the world and the world cost money, I found ways to make money and ways to trade time for it. You do not see the ledger of small sacrifices when you are a mother. You only feel the warmth in another person's face when you watch them thrive. She married Sebastian when she was 25. He had a smile that looked like it could belong on a billboard, and a gaze that measured rooms in dollars. I should have seen the measuring. I should have noticed how his attention, the first time he visited the house, snagged on practical details like the roof being paid off, or which bank held our mortgage. But I wanted my daughter to be happy. I wanted the fairy tale that my parents had never given me. So when they announced a wedding full of lace and white and guests who clinked glasses in the spring sunlight, I wrote another check even as my hands shook signing for it. The money I gave wasn't always called a loan at the time. It was a down payment, a little help, just this once. Those phrases have a way of settling into your ears like a lullaby. You tell yourself you're doing good. You tell yourself that tomorrow they'll return it, that this time it's temporary. Sometimes they meant it, and sometimes they didn't. But the common thread was that my acts of goodness created an expectation, not gratitude, but entitlement. People like to say, it's just money. But money is muscle memory in an older person's life. It is the medication you can buy for a husband if diabetes turns mean. It is the small comforts after decades of thrift. A quiet lunch with a friend, a replacement roof, a little cushion so you do not feel trapped by every unexpected thing. When Peter died, the life insurance wasn't much. $50,000. It felt like a fine sum at 70, and the world seemed less sharp with it sitting in my savings account. I promised myself I would finally take care of myself. I promised I would learn to be selfish in the way an elderly person has to be to survive. Not in the cruel sense, but in a manner that preserved dignity. Vanessa called 2 months after Peter's funeral. "Mom, we need $20,000, she said, and her voice had the practiced wobble of someone who understood exactly which notes to play. Sebastian, who had lost yet another job, Needed the money, they said, or the house would go into arrears. Caroline, my granddaughter, was 8 by then, a bright child who loved to draw and wore her heart on her sleeve. The thought of Caroline losing the house made my chest ache in ways I'd never felt. So I reached into what was left and pulled out what I thought was a lifeline. The money went, swallowed into their life like a quiet tide. They moved into a house that smelled of new paint and promise. But promises were porous in Vanessa's mouth. Soon the calls were back, a rainstorm of small crises, a broken refrigerator, a dented car, bills from a dentist. Each time I offered an amount that seemed reasonable in context, and each time the requests escalated. A pattern emerged: ask, receive, don't repay. They learned I would fill the cracks and then lay a rug over them. When a person learns they can pull sunlight from your pockets, they will not hesitate. On the day in the bank, Vanessa's voice was honey-coated. "Mom, just sign here. It's a transfer. To help with some new investment, to get some paperwork sorted." Sebastian stood close, like a shadow that still smelled of cigarettes. You know the way your skin remembers a person's touch long after the hand is gone? His grip ached in my arm like memory. His fingers were practiced in intimidation. He knew how to make someone feel small without a word. There were lights and hum and the small concierge buzz of normal life going on around us. People in a bank do not expect a domestic ambush. Banking clerks have routines and a polite calendar of smiles. I saw the documents earlier. I had been given a copy by a courteous bank assistant who assumed I understood the terms. It was not a small transfer. It was everything. 50,000, 40,000. All of the savings Peter and I had scraped together, the last glimmer of security for my remaining years. If you've ever been there, on the sharp edge of a decision where one sentence can hollow you out, you know how time alters itself. Seconds stretched like taffy. Vanessa's words were practiced to perfection. A clause here, a reassurance there. "You can't manage this much money," she said. And what she meant, and what she had built me to believe, was that my age made me incompetent, that the money would be safer in her hands. My granddaughter's name rose like a tidal chant. Think about Caroline. They had trained the phrase like a prayer I couldn't pollute. For years, they had constructed my duty to the family as a bridge over my own safety net. But there was Mr. Thompson, the bank manager, and the brief, private hope he offered when his eyes found mine and, without theatrics, dropped a pen-shaped lifeline in my lap. I slipped him a note, folded small and secret like a paper dove. "Help. I don't want to sign. I am being coerced." When he read it, his face changed from polite professionalism to something tender and urgent. He did not yell. He did not call attention. He pressed the kind of discreet button that arranges miracles in mundane places. An alarm. A procedure. A set of eyes that will no longer look away. The office where he took me was small, with family photos that made me think of my own life built in frames. He listened like people used to listen in a world where neighbors sometimes still looked in on one another. I told him about the decades, the steady erosion of my nest egg into the households of 2 adults who apparently never had to earn the comforts they enjoyed. I told him about Sebastian's hand that ached my arm, and about Vanessa's smile that had become a steel trap. I told him about promises that dissolve like sugar in tea. He told me gently about legal protections for elders, about the concept of financial coercion, and how it can be a form of abuse. Those words, abuse, coercion, exploitation, sounded heavy and new in my mouth. For the first time, I could name what had been happening to me not as martyrdom, but as harm. When you can name harm, you can begin to stand against it. He took down my account details, placed an alert, and told me to call a number if I felt threatened. He was careful not to slap a label on my child, but he didn't have to. The law had language to protect me, and in a brittle voice, learned from the edge of a lifetime, I said the word I had secretly rehearsed for nights. No. Walking back to Vanessa felt like stepping into a minefield. She tried the old things first. Tears. Recollections of our past closeness. The narrative of family always getting by together. Sebastian tightened his grip a fraction, testing, measuring. The bank's walls may be thick, but deceit can be practiced in 1,000 small cadences. I was 70 then in all the ways that mattered. Older, bone-tired and steady in the way someone who has held on for decades can be steady. "I'm not signing," I told them in a voice that surprised me with its clear shape. They reacted in ways that would be familiar to anyone who's ever attempted to protect a small keep of dignity against those who would take it. Vanessa's face contorted into what I later called the performance of hurt. Theatrical, precise. Sebastian moved with that quick, low, dangerous anger of a man who thinks the world owes him, and when it refuses, he must take it. They tried to bargain, to divide the total into halves and quarters, to make my refusal look like me being unreasonable. They tried to weaponize the word selfish. If you don't help, you'll be alone, they said. Don't come crying. Those sentences were meant to detonate the hidden fears older people carry. Stairwells, medicines, nights alone. They are pain-filled images we have all danced around at some point. When they left after the bank guards gently but firmly escorted them out, they left me with a silence that felt like both victory and a wound. The first hours afterward were strange. My home echoed with the hum of absence. That night the phone did what predictable storms do. It rang and rang and rang. Vanessa's name lighting the screen and a tide of texts that climbed like small knives. I did not answer. I slept in my chair, half worried that I had made a mistake, half relieved I had taken a step. The next day they came to my house. The sight of Vanessa in a yellow dress, my favorite color, she knew that, of course, was a cruelty designed to make me soft. Caroline clutched a crayon drawing that said Grandma in wide, earnest letters. If you're a grandmother, you know the shape of that little paper. It is both a weapon and a bomb. My hands reached for the door handle before my head could stop them. The sound of my granddaughter's small voice asking why Grandma wouldn't open the door felt like a small physical ache, closer to panic than grief. I almost opened it. I almost let the years of habit unravel my resolve. And then I thought of Peter. I remembered what he had said once while we watched a television story about scams aimed at seniors. They make you live in the future of fear, he said, rubbing his thumb against his knuckle, a small tick of his when he concentrated. They make you imagine the terrible things ahead so you'll give them what they want now. He had a way of naming traps with a clarity that made them seem less monstrous. I thought of his hand in mine as he said it, of the way he'd shown me the math of things we could survive and things we could not. That memory steadied me. Fear is not a friend. Fear is a persuader. I did not open the door. I sat in the dark and listened to their voices fade from the lawn. When they left, I felt the strange, raw freedom of someone who had chosen herself for once. But freedom, in the first days, has an ugly neighbor called loneliness. I sat with it. I listened to old records and let the piano notes fill the corners of the house where their laughter used to live. My sister Clara called, and her voice was at first scolding. You have to help your daughter, she said, and then softer. But he hurt you? The admission that someone I had loved and raised had allowed me to be hurt by another person's hand made the world tilt. Saying it out loud made it more true, and truth has a bad habit of changing everything. There were so many small, practical things to worry about after that. The alert on my account, the forms to fill, the line at the Social Security office. But beneath the paperwork was a quieter, more dangerous concern. What would Vanessa do next? People who feel entitled reshape their lives quickly when resistance arises. Would she beg? Would she threaten? Would she break my heart in a way I had not thought possible? Those questions are heavy, and it is hard to rest under their weight. This is where I stop part one of my story, but not because the story ends. It stops because in that pause, there is the moment where you can still change a life, a turning that asks, when you've been taught to give until there's nothing left, can you teach yourself to keep enough? In the next part, I will tell you what happened when Vanessa started calling the neighbors, when she told a version of the story that made me look irrational, and how small kindnesses from strangers began to stitch the world back together in ways I had not expected. I will tell you about letters and a lawyer I could barely afford, about the way people choose sides, and about a truth so stubborn it refused to be bought. Before we move on, a small request. If anything I've said so far reminds you of someone you love, or even yourself, please hit like and subscribe to Aunt Clara's Tale. Share this with someone you trust. Stories like this, about boundaries, about elder abuse hidden under the guise of family, need to be told, and they need the light. Stay with me for part 2. There is a secret in Vanessa's past that I only learned weeks later, and it changed everything. The days that followed felt like a strange blend of silence and noise. Silence in my house, where I avoided answering the phone and let the soft hum of the refrigerator fill the space that once belonged to conversation. Noise in the neighborhood, where whispers seemed to gather like leaves against a fence. Vanessa was quick. I should have known she would be. She had always been clever with stories, spinning them into threads that wrapped neatly around people's hearts. And now, she spun me into something ugly. I first heard it from my neighbor Margaret, a sweet woman with soft curls and a habit of bringing banana bread on Sundays. She called me on the third evening after the bank incident, her voice carrying that hesitant tone people use when they're not sure if you know the news yet. "Olivia," she said gently, "Vanessa stopped by today. She said you might be having trouble remembering things, that you've been confused lately." I sat in my chair, frozen, confused. The word crawled over my skin like insects. It wasn't enough for her to take my money. Now she was taking my mind too. Margaret kept speaking, trying to be diplomatic, but I could hear the doubt settling in her voice. Vanessa had planted it well, like seeds in a garden. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Peter's absence pressing on me heavier than ever. I wanted to reach for his steady hand to ask him what to do. He would have known. He always had a way of cutting through fog with plain words. Instead, I was left with my thoughts and the ache of betrayal. My own daughter was trying to turn the world against me, and the world, as it often does, was listening. 2 days later, I got a letter slipped under my door. It wasn't in an envelope, just a folded sheet of lined paper in Vanessa's handwriting. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You know you can't handle finances on your own. Please stop embarrassing yourself. Think about Caroline. She needs stability. We're her parents, and we know best. Sign the transfer and this will all be behind us." Behind us. As though she were doing me a favor. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my heart pounding in a way that made me afraid for my health. I sat back down in my chair, breathing hard until tears finally came. They weren't soft tears, not the kind you dab gently with a handkerchief. They were deep, shuddering sobs that racked through me until I thought I might break apart. And then, in the midst of it, came another knock. "My sister Clara, Olivia?" Her voice called. She had a key, of course, but she respected my space. I opened the door, my eyes red, the crumpled letter still clutched in my hand. Clara didn't ask. She just stepped inside and wrapped me in her arms. That's the thing about sisters. They don't need the details to understand the storm you're standing in. When I told her everything, the bank, the threats, the lies about my memory, her face went pale with anger. "This isn't just selfishness," she said firmly. "This is abuse. Don't you dare let them gaslight you into believing otherwise." Her words gave me strength, but they also scared me. Abuse. Such a heavy, ugly word. To think my own child could be the one wielding it. I could hardly breathe under the weight of that reality. The next morning, Clara drove me to see a lawyer. I'd never been inside a law office before. The smell of paper and polish, the hum of computers, the quiet gravity of people dealing with heavy things. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Lawson, listened carefully, his pen scratching notes as I spoke. When I was done, he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Anderson, what you're describing falls under elder financial exploitation. You have rights. We can protect your assets, and if necessary, pursue legal action." Legal action. Against my own daughter. The thought twisted my stomach. But what choice did I have? If I didn't act, I'd lose everything. Not just the money, but the last shred of independence that let me hold my head high. Mr. Lawson suggested a restraining order against Sebastian at the very least. The memory of his grip on my arm made me nod, though my heart rebelled at the idea of dragging my daughter into court. Still, we began the paperwork. My hands shook as I signed each page, but Clara squeezed my shoulder, grounding me. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink low. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa. I ignored it. Then came the text messages, rapid fire, each one more desperate than the last. "Why are you doing this to us?" "You don't understand, Mom. We need this." "If you love Caroline, you'll stop this nonsense." The last one nearly broke me. If you love Caroline, the cruelest knife she could twist. But I didn't answer. The next week, things escalated. Vanessa showed up at my church. She cornered me after service, her eyes red, her voice trembling just enough to earn the sympathy of others. "My mom is sick," she whispered to a group of women I'd known for years. "She's confused. Please pray for her," I wanted to scream, to shake them all and tell them the truth. But shame held me quiet, and in my silence, Vanessa's lies spread like wildfire. People I'd trusted began to look at me differently, their smiles tighter, their voices careful. Doubt is contagious, and Vanessa knew it. One evening, Margaret came over again. She set down a plate of cookies on my table and sat across from me, folding her hands. "Olivia, I don't know what's happening between you and Vanessa, but I do know this. You are not alone. If you need someone to speak up for you, I will. Don't let her make you feel like you're crazy." Her words cracked something open in me. Not all the world was against me. There were still people who saw me, who believed me. And sometimes that's enough to keep going. But the real turning point came 2 weeks later. A letter arrived. Not from Vanessa, not from Sebastian, but from Caroline. The envelope was pink, the handwriting messy and childlike. Inside was a note written in colored markers. "Dear Grandma, I miss you. Mommy says you don't want to see me, but I know that's not true. I love you." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried. My granddaughter, why is my sweet, innocent Caroline, was being used as a pawn in this ugly game. But her words reminded me why I was fighting, not just for myself, but for her. For the day when she would be old enough to see the truth, and I could look her in the eye and say, "I didn't let them take everything." That night, I called Mr. Lawson again. My voice was steady this time. "Do whatever you have to," I said. "I won't let them win." But I didn't know then. Vanessa wasn't done. She was about to cross a line I never thought my own child would dare to cross. I didn't think it could get worse. I truly believed that once I had a lawyer involved, Vanessa and Sebastian would back down, that they'd realize the line they had crossed and retreat before the law came crashing down on them. But I underestimated the desperation that grows in people who have learned to live off someone else's sacrifice. The next blow came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had just settled into my armchair with a blanket and a book when there was a sharp knock at the door. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood on my porch. "Mrs. Anderson?" one of them asked, his tone polite but clipped. "We need to speak with you about some allegations that were made." My stomach dropped. Allegations. The word rattled through me like thunder. They stepped inside, dripping water on my rug, and explained that a report had been filed claiming that I was mentally unstable, unable to manage my own affairs, and potentially a danger to myself. Vanessa. Of course. I sat there, numb as they asked me questions. Could I recall the date? Could I list my medications? Could I explain my income? I answered each one with quiet precision, my voice steady even though my hands trembled in my lap. At the end, the younger officer exchanged a look with his partner and gave a small nod. "You seem fine to us, ma'am," he said kindly. "But please understand when these reports are made, we're obligated to follow up. If it continues, you might need to go through an evaluation with the court." As soon as they left, I collapsed onto the couch, my chest heaving. She was trying to declare me incompetent. My own daughter was preparing the ground to have me stripped of control over my own life. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. I called Clara, my voice shaking. She came over immediately, her fury barely contained. "This is war," she said flatly. "If she's going this far, we have to be ready to fight all the way." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like a warning, every shadow a threat. I kept replaying the officer's words in my head. If it continues, you might need to go through an evaluation. What if Vanessa succeeded? What if the court believed her lies? What if I lost not just my money, but my independence, my dignity, my freedom? The next morning, I went back to see Mr. Lawson. His face darkened as I recounted what had happened. "This is a common tactic," he explained grimly. "If she can convince the court you're not competent, she could gain guardianship over you and your assets. We need to act fast. I'll file for a protective order and start gathering evidence of your capacity." Evidence. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. At nearly 70 years old, after a lifetime of raising a family, running a household, and managing bills down to the penny, I now had to prove that I was still capable. Prove it to strangers who had never lived a single day in my shoes. But I agreed. I would sit through the evaluations. I would provide the paperwork. I would do whatever it took, because losing wasn't an option. Meanwhile, Vanessa was relentless. She started telling neighbors that I was paranoid, that Clara was filling my head with lies, that I was being manipulated. The same people who once waved at me warmly across their lawns now hesitated, their greetings shorter, their smiles thin. And then came Caroline again. One Saturday afternoon, I heard her small knock at my door. When I opened it, there she stood, my sweet granddaughter, holding a stuffed bunny and looking up at me with those big, trusting eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mommy says you don't love us anymore." "Is that true?" I felt my heart shatter. How do you explain adult betrayal to a child? How do you undo the poison of lies whispered into innocent ears? I knelt down, taking her hands gently in mine. "Oh, darling," I said softly, "I will always love you. That will never change. Don't you ever believe otherwise." She smiled a little then, but I could see the confusion still clouding her eyes. Before I could say more, Vanessa appeared at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, her expression hard. "Caroline!" she called sharply. "Time to go." Caroline hugged me quickly and ran back to her mother, glancing over her shoulder with a look that nearly undid me. I stood there on the porch long after they were gone, clutching the memory of her small hands in mine like a lifeline. That evening, Clara and I sat in the kitchen, sipping tea. "She's using Caroline against you," Clara said bitterly. "It's cruel, but it's exactly the kind of thing Sebastian would encourage. He knows your weak spot. She was right. Caroline was the one thread I couldn't bear to see pulled, and Vanessa knew it. The legal battle dragged on. I had to sit through evaluations, answer endless questions, produce documents to prove I was capable of managing my own life. It was exhausting, humiliating, but necessary. Through it all, Clara stayed by my side, her strength bolstering mine. And then, just when I thought I had endured the worst, a new revelation came to light. One afternoon, Mr. Lawson called me into his office. He looked more serious than usual, his brow furrowed as he shuffled a stack of papers. "Olivia," he said carefully, "in the process of reviewing financial records, we discovered something. Vanessa and Sebastian have been taking out loans in your name. Several, in fact. They forged your signature. For a moment the room spun. Forgery. Debt in my name. My knees went weak and I gripped the arm of the chair to steady myself. How much?" I whispered. He slid the papers toward me. Numbers stared back at me, cold and merciless. Tens of thousands. More than I could ever hope to repay on my fixed income. I felt sick. Not only had they tried to steal what little I had, they had already been stealing behind my back, dragging my name and credit into the mud. "They've crossed a line into criminal territory," Mr. Lawson said firmly. "We need to involve the authorities. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's fraud. Fraud. Against their own mother. Against the woman who had given them everything." I sat there, tears sliding down my cheeks, my voice barely audible. How could she do this to me? How could my own daughter? Mr. Lawson leaned forward, his tone gentle but resolute. "Because people who learn to take will keep taking until someone stops them. Olivia, it's time to stop them." I nodded, though my heart felt like it was splintering. The fight had just reached a whole new level. And in the days that followed, I would learn something even more devastating. A secret about Sebastian, buried in his past. That explained why Vanessa was willing to follow him down this dark path. A secret that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the man my daughter married. The air outside felt heavy that evening, thick with the kind of storm that doesn't just rattle windows, but settles deep into your bones. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of documents Mr. Lawson had given me. Proof of the loans taken in my name. Forged signatures that looked enough like mine to fool a bank clerk. Balances that sent my stomach churning. I had thought betrayal was my daughter whispering lies about my sanity. I had thought the cruelest wound was being kept from my granddaughter's embrace. But fraud, cold, calculated theft, it was something darker. Something that couldn't be brushed aside as a misunderstanding. And yet, I wasn't prepared for what Mr. Lawson uncovered next. He called me into his office again, the same grave expression on his face. "Olivia, I want you to sit down before I tell you this." My knees trembled as I lowered myself into the leather chair. "It's about Sebastian," he began slowly. "When we started digging into his financial history, something surfaced. Records from another state. Criminal records." My breath caught in my throat. "Criminal?" Mr. Lawson nodded. "He was arrested years ago under a different name. Fraud, identity theft, and something worse. Elder financial exploitation. He served a short sentence, then moved here and changed his name. He reinvented himself, Olivia. And your daughter. Whether she knows the full story or not, she's tied herself to a man with a dangerous past." The words hit me like blows. I gripped the edge of the chair, my vision swimming. Elder exploitation. My heart pounded with a sickening clarity. This wasn't just greed. This was his pattern. Vanessa wasn't just blindly following him. She was caught in the web of a man who had perfected the art of preying on people like me. I stumbled home in a daze. Clara met me there, concern etched across her face as I told her what I'd learned. She slammed her hand on the table. "That explains everything. His charm, the way he talks circles around people, the control he has over Vanessa. Mom, we have to expose him." But exposing him wasn't as easy as it sounded. Vanessa refused to believe a word. When we tried to confront her with the documents, she laughed bitterly. "You'll say anything to make me leave him. Anything. He's the only one who's ever stood by me, unlike you." Her words sliced deeper than she knew. The irony was unbearable. She thought he was standing by her, when in truth, he was standing on her shoulders, dragging her down into his schemes. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal motions, meetings and sleepless nights. Mr. Lawson filed charges, and suddenly, my quiet life was thrust into the chaos of courts and depositions. Neighbors whispered. Some offered quiet support. Others shook their heads, convinced I was making a mess of family business that should have stayed private. Caroline's absence weighed on me most of all. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and every day without her smile felt like another thread of my soul unraveling. One night, as I sat staring at the darkened street outside, my phone rang. A small trembling voice came through. "Grandma? Caroline?" I gasped, clutching the phone tight. "Grandma, I don't like when Mommy and Sebastian fight," she whispered. "They yell a lot. And sometimes Sebastian scares me." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, listen to me. None of this is your fault. You are so loved. So loved." Before I could say more, the line went dead. I sat frozen, the silence pressing in on me. She was scared. My granddaughter, caught in the crossfire of adult greed and lies, was scared. And I was powerless to hold her, powerless to shield her. The next day, I told Mr. Lawson about the call. His jaw tightened. "This strengthens your case, Olivia. If Sebastian is creating a dangerous environment, we can bring child welfare into this. But we need proof. Proof, always proof. In a world where my words seemed to weigh less than a forged signature, I needed more than tears and heartache. I needed something undeniable, and proof, as it turned out, would come from an unexpected place." One afternoon, Clara burst into my house, her face pale but triumphant. She held out a small USB drive. "I got this from one of Sebastian's old business associates. He reached out after hearing what's happening. He said he couldn't stay silent anymore." My hands shook as we plugged it into the computer. Files opened, contracts, emails, scanned documents. And then recordings. Clear as day, Sebastian's voice, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate Vanessa, how gullible I was, how he had an old woman right where he wanted her. My stomach turned as his words spilled into the room. But alongside the horror was relief. Proof. Real, tangible proof. We brought it straight to Mr. Lawson. His eyes widened as he listened. "This is it. This is what we needed. With this, the case against him is ironclad." And yet, even as victory glimmered on the horizon, I couldn't shake the ache in my heart. Because victory in court wouldn't mend the rift with Vanessa. It wouldn't erase the look in Caroline's eyes when she asked if I still loved her. Still, I pressed on. I had to. Not just for myself, but for Caroline. for the child who deserved to grow up free from the shadows of her mother's choices and her stepfather's crimes. The day of the hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom, hands clasped tightly in my lap, Clara by my side. Vanessa and Sebastian sat across from us. He wore that smug half smile, the one that used to charm but now looked like a mask cracking at the edges. Vanessa avoided my gaze, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite read. The judge entered. The gavel struck, and the proceedings began. I had prepared myself for battle, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment Vanessa finally spoke. Not to defend herself, not to defend Sebastian, but to reveal something I never expected to hear. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that hums louder than thunder. Vanessa stood slowly, her hands twisting together, her eyes darting between the judge, Sebastian, and me. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling. I need to tell the truth." Sebastian's head snapped toward her, his smile vanishing. He hissed under his breath, but Vanessa didn't sit down. She swallowed hard, her shoulders shaking. "When I met Sebastian," she said, her voice cracking, "I didn't know who he really was. I didn't know about his past, or what he'd done to other families. By the time I found out, I was already pregnant with Caroline. I thought if I just stood by him, if I proved my loyalty, maybe he would change. Maybe he would be the man I wanted him to be." Gasps rippled through the room. My heart clenched. Pregnant when she found out, tied to him not just by choice but by fear, Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "But he hasn't changed. He's only gotten worse, and I've helped him hurt my own mother. I let him use me as a weapon against her. I told myself it was survival, but it was betrayal." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Mom." My breath caught. The judge banged the gavel for order, but I could barely hear it over the rush of blood in my ears. Vanessa was unraveling, right there in front of everyone, and Sebastian, his mask shattered. He lunged toward her, grabbing her wrist. "Shut up!" he snarled, his voice echoing. The bailiff moved in instantly, pulling him back, but the damage was done. The courtroom had seen his true face. The judge's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and final. "Enough. This court has heard and seen sufficient evidence. The forged documents, the fraudulent loans, the recordings, and now the testimony. Mr. Sebastian Grant, you are remanded into custody pending trial for fraud, forgery, and exploitation. Vanessa Grant, while complicit in certain actions, your cooperation today will be considered in sentencing." The gavel came down. It was over. At least, legally. I sat frozen as Sebastian was led away, still cursing under his breath. Vanessa crumpled into her chair, shoulders shaking. Clara squeezed my hand so tightly I thought my bones might break, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was still here, still standing. Later, outside the courthouse, Vanessa approached me. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. "Mom," she whispered, her voice raw, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know, I see it now. I see what he did, and what I let him do. I'm so sorry." For a long moment I couldn't speak. My heart warred with itself. The mother who had loved her child since the day she was born, and the woman who had been betrayed, used, nearly destroyed. Finally, I reached out and touched her cheek. "Vanessa," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't something I can hand you like a gift. It's something you'll have to earn, step by step. But for Caroline's sake, and because you're my daughter, I hope one day we'll find our way back." She broke down again, nodding, clinging to that small thread of hope. Weeks turned into months. Sebastian remained behind bars, his trial making headlines in the local papers. Vanessa cooperated fully, her testimony sealing his fate. Eventually, he was sentenced to years in prison, time enough for the world to forget his charming lies. Vanessa moved into a small apartment, away from the house they once shared. She started therapy, working on herself, trying to rebuild. Sometimes she came by with Caroline. At first, our visits were strained. Awkward silences, careful words. But little by little, the wall between us began to crack. Caroline, innocent as ever, brought light back into my home. She would curl up in my lap with her stuffed bunny and giggle as I read her stories. And every time I'd catch Vanessa watching us, her eyes filled with both regret and longing. Clara remained my rock. She never wavered, never stopped fighting for me. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me. "Mom, you know you saved more than just yourself in all this. You saved Vanessa. You saved Caroline. You stood up when it mattered most." I thought about that for a long time. I hadn't felt like a savior. I'd felt like a woman cornered, forced to claw her way out of a nightmare. But maybe survival itself is a kind of salvation. Maybe by refusing to be silent, I had broken the cycle that might have swallowed not just me, but my daughter and granddaughter too. Life didn't go back to what it was before. It never could. But it moved forward, slowly, carefully, with scars that would always remain, but with hope blooming in their shadows. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, I would whisper a prayer of gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the strength I found in it, for the family I still had, for the lessons etched deep into my soul. I learned that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the people you love most. But I also learned that love, real love, can survive even the sharpest wounds, if you're willing to fight for it. And so, if you're listening to my story tonight, wondering if you have the strength to stand against the ones who wronged you, let me tell you this, you do. Even when your heart is breaking, even when the world doubts you, even when the ones closest to you turn away, you are stronger than you know, because I was. And if I was, then so are you, so don't give up. Don't let them take what is yours, your dignity, your voice, your hope. Hold on. Fight. And one day, you'll look back, like I do now, and realize you didn't just survive, you overcame. And that, my dear friends, is the story of how I lost nearly everything, and yet somehow found more than I ever imagined I still had.